as the Himalayan Tiger Foundations, are sort of newcomers in this field, and we are a small foundation so far. Of course, we will grow. So our philosophy was that let's do what we can, and let's avoid all the complicated things that we cannot do. And this graph, you must have seen several times. It shows how tigers have declined in recent times and would go to extinction if you wouldn't do anything at all. But it shows other interesting things. It shows that, in fact, the decline in tigers is also correlated with the decline in forest areas. And then it suggests that if we do something, tigers may start to increase, and that they should grow exponentially because of our efforts. But then you see the efforts are reforestation. And I personally don't think that with the enormous population pressure in the Terai, it will be possible to really reforest large areas which are now occupied by people doing agriculture. So the question is then, how could we still help the tigers to grow? Now, for that, I have to, this is the most difficult slide I'm going to show you. You're all getting tired. This slide tells you how, in fact, an ecosystem consists of interdependent parts that have to interact. And the idea is that large predators are keystone species very often, and they help to determine the distribution and the diversity and abundance of herbivores, which are their prey. And herbivores, at their turn, they affect the vegetation. They determine how a park would look like. And then we know from recent theoretical work that higher biodiversity could help to increase the productivity of an ecosystem, which is interesting. And if we could have a higher productivity of the ecosystem, then we could have higher densities of food for the tiger, higher densities of herbivores, of large herbivores. And as a consequence, we could stack more tigers per surface area. And as we don't think that at this moment the Himalayan Tiger Foundation can really help in making the corridors better to save the genetic composition of the tigers in the Terai, we think that it might be interesting to look at one ecosystem and try to optimize that. Now, in Bardia, there are several very important systems. You have not only, I previously suggested that tigers somehow are forest species because there was this correlation of deforestation and downgoing tiger numbers. But grasslands are also very important for ungulates and for tigers. And in Bardia we find a lot of high grass vegetation, and that is a very important habitat. Although it's often rather poor in species, in plant species. And the management of those grasslands is that either they are in the riverbed, in the floodplain, and then they are maintained by flooding, which prevents forests to grow there. But if they are on higher grounds, they are generally man-made, and then they are kept by yearly burning, and the yearly burning prevents the colonization by trees and keeps the area open. And these high grass areas, they are important. They contain some rare species. But since humans, when they have cleared part of a forest, they do that in a sort of, on a large scale, and they make large areas of grass where they burn large fires, and that's probably different from how it was a long time ago. My idea is that in the past, the landscape was much more fine-grained with smaller areas of grassland. If you look around in Bardia, then you can still see lots of traces of man's activity. Animals have become rare because of hunting and poaching. People have been harvesting trees, fodder and grass. They have burned the grasslands. And although in 1976 it became a park and it has recovered quite a lot, there's still a lot that we can do to improve it. So here you see such a man-made habitat with Imperata cylindrica as almost the only species. And here you see people who have harvested the grass to thatch their roofs. And here you see how they burn to keep the area open. And what we know is that several species have disappeared. The pygmy hawk, which is a species, really a real Terai species that has disappeared from Nepal. It only exists in India in 2 or 3 very small populations. And the Bengal florican occurred in the past in the grassland I just showed you, but it has disappeared. So that means that we have to think about how to improve the local ecosystem in Bardia and what should we know to do that. And so the aim of the Himalayan Tiger Foundation is to have science-based conservation management, and it will promote all people that will contribute to this issue. And what we want is to increase the carrying capacity for tigers by creating more spatial diversity in the forest and by increasing the surface area of grazing lawns. And what those are, I will tell you in a minute, but first I want to look at the forest. Here you see salt forest that has been cattle grazed for a long time, and you see that there are very few young trees and that the forest floor is covered only by short grass, which is good for the cattle. It is maintained that way also by burning to remove things. And this is how a burned forest might look. And it's interesting to note that when Bardia became a national park in the 70s, an American researcher, Dinerstein, worked for quite a long time in the area. And he said that at the moment that he was doing surveys of the vegetation, 80% of the forest floor was bare. And if you go now into the forest, you might find areas where you have nice grassy areas under the trees, where you have recruitment of young trees, and where there are open spaces where the sunlight can reach the forest floor and allow a rich vegetation on the forest floor, which is good for the ungulates. And last autumn we have been counting deer, and unlike Dinerstein, who found that deer were not very common in the forest, we counted the highest numbers of deer in the forest. It seems that there are improvements, but maybe we could even improve it further. Studies in other regions of Asia and in Africa have shown that other keystone species are the mega herbivores because they can open up high grassland or forest and make it more diverse. And so we think that one of the reasons why Bardia looks now like it does is because these large mega herbivores have been absent for quite a while and are now present, but only in small numbers. And so we think that Bardia would do much better if the numbers of these large mega herbivores would increase. And it's not only by changing the vegetation, but they're also very important in carrying seeds to different places. And elephants can walk long distances, and they may in that way bring back tree species and plant species to communal forests where cattle grazing has removed a lot of that species. And an example of that is here, these rhino apple seedlings in the den of a rhino. You see there are hundreds. Now the savanna. Here you have a man-made savanna, which is burned, and I'm not sure, I've been discussing that with people, but it seems that the burning kills the trees, in part. This is riverine grassland, and so this is kept as it is by the annual floodings during the wet season. Now these areas do not have large numbers of ungulates feeding. The reason is that the grass is only available for them as food after the burning, when the rains come back and the young grass starts to sprout. Then it's tender and they can eat it. But to maintain a large population of ungulates, you want to have food throughout the year. And once the grass has grown up, it becomes hard and undigestible for the ungulates, and they don't feed on it anymore. Now, interestingly, there are some places where the grasses are relatively short. And then you can have ungulates concentrating on those areas and preventing the high grass from growing back. And because they feed a lot there, they also leave a lot of droppings. They compact the soil, make it rich in food, and it turns such vegetation in very productive grassland. And these are called grazing lawns. And we think also that the large herbivores, particularly the rhinos, could be instrumental in helping the long grass to become shorter and to open up areas so that the deer can move in and can turn them into grazing lawns. And so we think that increasing the carrying capacity for ungulates could be reached by promoting the formation of grazing lawns. These grazing lawns now cover only very small areas. The blackbuck is not a species you can find in Bardia National Park. But I show it here because the blackbuck is also a species that lives in water grass. And now it only lives in one island, one part where it is isolated. But I guess that it must have roamed in the past throughout in the Terai, which means that in the past you must have the shorter grasslands in a much larger area. Otherwise the species could not have existed here. So what we want to do is to increase the food for the tigers. Bardia is rich in species. There are 5 species of deer. You see 4 of them here. The sambar, the swamp deer, hawk deer, and the cheetal. And we think that by creating more open habitat, we could have more of those. So I have sort of told you what I believe that would be good. But we, as scientists, need to be sure. So it is certainly so that if there would be too many elephants in Bardia, that they would destroy the forest. So we would like to know what would be optimal numbers of elephants and rhinos to get a nice, rich, variable ecosystem. And we would like to have the instruments to maximize the biodiversity and the productivity in Bardia Park, with the final aim to maximize the number of tigers. And all these questions, they need quantitative answers, which means that biologists have to go in the forest, do experiments, and measure all these things so that we can predict what would be good management. And that's what we think is science-based conservation management. And if you do that, you might be able to double the number of tigers by not increasing the surface area of the forest, but simply by increasing the quality of the forest. And that's my message. Thank you.